Oh my gosh. So here we are back again, having had so much fun doing part one. So if you haven't seen part one, we highly recommend you see part one, and then you can tune into part two, which is what we're about to do
Part
now.
one is all about grokking.
Rocking, yes, and
Yeah.
being
Yes. And being weird.
weird.
Grokking and being weird. So you got to grok and be weird, and then you can catch up with us here. Or you can go back and grok and be weird. It's all good.
It's all good,
But
yeah. And those
understand
are the
that
kinds
they're,
of things like what we talked about in that first video. Those are the kinds of things I had to hear many times before I could grok it.
yeah, no,
I mean,
seriously.
I had to grok it at different levels. Like I'd get some each time I heard it, and then I'd get more the next time I heard it, and then I'd get more and more.
Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
that's a really good point, Caitlin, because something that I sort of avoided, I don't know if it's because I'm an Aries or what, or like impatience or like it was just youth, but I tried to avoid repeating myself for a long time. And I would say, I'm not gonna, I'm never gonna give the same, because I saw people like giving the same talks and I would get bored personally. And I would be like, I'm not gonna be that guy. But then I realized later in my career is like, no, like you really like repetition, you really need actually a lot of that. And it's okay if you're repeating yourself because you're never going to repeat yourself exactly the same way. And it's always going to be from a little bit different angle and stuff. And so I've actually come full 360 degree, or I guess 180 actually. Um,
Yeah.
I've come around on that and realizing, yeah, like it's really good to repeat stuff.
I think that
Mainly
might be
because
an Aries
that's
thing.
how we learn, you know?
Aries can get bored easily, and but
Yeah, Gemini. I've got Gemini on my IC as well, so
Aquarius might get bored. Certain signs might get bored if they think they've heard it before. It's like, eh.
yeah, tell me something new, man. Yeah, I could go on, but no,
Right.
it's really important to like um to sit with that discomfort a little bit and allow and realize like repetition is how we learn, A, and
Yeah.
B, like it's how nature works. Like it's a spiral. Like
It's
you've
repeating
been
over
through
and over.
many, we've
Yeah.
been through many, both of us anyway have been through. I'm not going to speak for you because it's not polite, but I've been through more than a couple handfuls of solstices, let's just say.
Right. Same here.
More than a couple handful of solstices as an astrologer, actually, now that you mention
Right. Yeah,
it.
same.
And so it's just the way that we learn. It's the way that the universe works. We're in a cyclical reality, and
So
so
here we are approaching the
yeah,
December solstice 2024. And the sol and any solstice, no matter when it is when the sun reaches zero Capricorn on the galactic cross, as we explained in the last video, and took really deep, wonderful journey through all of that. And this December solstice has a couple, well, one particularly to me, what stands out in terms of looking at the fact that the nodal axis, the north node is at 2 Aries and the south node is at 2 Libra, and 0 Aries and Libra are the equinox points.
yes,
So very quickly, those points are going to come to the 0 point. I think January 11th, and then they actually shift into another sign. And this can only happen about every 18 and a half years.
hmm
And it also, whenever the nodes are in Aries Libra, North Node in Aries, South Node in Libra, we have the lunar standstill,
yeah,
the extreme out of bounds moon time things happening.
yeah,
And when it reaches the 0 Aries point, we know at the exact center point of the 2 or 3 years that'll be on either side of that point of when the moon is going in its most out of bounds place.
yeah. And this is something, as you know very well, Caitlin. I think you've even experienced it personally. The stone circles of the Neolithic peoples were very aware and very tuned in to marking these times of the lunar standstills. And in particular, there's one in Callanish in Scotland where the moon kind of grazes across the top of the stone circle, and there's different people think that there's sort of goddess um, stones that are meant to represent the triple goddess, essentially, right? Maybe you could speak a little bit more
Yeah,
about.
well, I was just there actually this year, so
Yeah.
again for the third time. And so what happens is the moon literally looks like it's skimming the horizon. It never goes above like it usually does, goes above. It just looks like it's walking on the land. And then they have the stone circle. And so it's like the moon will walk across the land. It kind of disappears behind a little mountain and then it reappears in a V. And it looks like it's right inside the stone circle if you're standing in the right place. It's
Mhm.
all perspective, of course, right?
Yeah,
So it only happens for a time period every 19 years.
yeah. And it's
And
when the nodes are aligned at the zero Aries, zero Libra.
that's the center point of the timing that that takes place.
Yeah,
Yes. And they had a saying that said, when the moon walks the land at the calling of the cuckoo, the great shining ones will return. And so I have had this experience of when I was there the first time, and somebody said, "Oh, I just heard a cuckoo," and I was like, "Oh my God, we're the shining ones. I mean, we're the transition team, right? We're the transition team for the great 20,000 year cycle.
mm,
We must be the shining ones coming back, remembering, like in a human form. Shining ones could have been in many different forms,
right.
uh, but that's encoded in us, and that's awakening within us. And
Wow.
during this standstill time, during the solstice times, during the out of bounds full moons, well, any out of bounds moon. But here's the thing people can really keep in mind as well is that the sun, as Gary shared in the last video, rises furthest north and furthest south at the solstices. The
Yeah,
December solstice furthest south, the June solstice furthest north, and that's the seasonal mark. Well, the moon can go outside those. The sun can never go past a certain point. It's like
yeah,
always that's where that's furthest out is ever going to go. But the moon can go out past that, and so it's called out of bounds, and it's outside the boundaries of our ordinary reality. So that's happening when the nodes reach the zero Aries point in January. That means we're in the center point of this lunar cycle.
maximum out of bounds experience. You
Yeah,
know, think about that. Like our reality is expanded. You know, the moon is literally as far out of bounds as she gets.
right.
Yeah, and I love what you said. Basically, I'm paraphrasing, but it sounded like you said we are the shining ones, you
We
know?
are.
And I
Yeah.
love that because, like, you hear people talk about projection, usually in a negative form, and it's usually like shadow stuff, like, you know, but you're actually, what I hear you saying is that, hey, maybe we're projecting our light too.
Yes.
Maybe we can withdraw that projection and say, maybe we are the shining ones. Wow.
Yeah. And we may still have where we're shining our light, we get to see our shadow, but and work on that because
Yeah.
that's part of the deal.
Right.
But I feel like here we are at this turning of a 26,000 year cycle. Here we are at this lunar standstill time. Here we are at the beginning of a new solar year at the December solstice and a new galactic year at a December solstice, at every December solstice for like 144 years. And here we are with the moon going outside the boundaries of the sun, reminding us and helping us awaken that I think it's in our DNA. I think it's inside of us already. We just have forgotten. So
Yeah.
it's our opportunity to remember and going outside and being with the full moon and being with the sun, being with the sun, moon as it's rising and the sun as it's setting, or the stars like you described in the last video when you went outside and you saw the sunset and then you saw the planets start to be illuminated in the
Yeah.
sky. That's how we're wakening up, awakening to this reality that is encoded in who we are.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, so like as astrologers that track the planets, and we know as modern people, we know that this process of understanding the planets, which the word planet means wandering star. So the Neolithic people that made these stone circles and knew about these lunar standstills and stuff, they didn't necessarily, we don't know they did, we don't know that they didn't, but we know that the people in the Fertile Crescent only began to understand and record the motions of the planets later, fairly later than the Neolithic period. And so So there's this process of understanding the planets and understanding like the synodic cycles and all that. And that took 30 generations of people who, and by the way, this is like in a sort of hierarchical society that we all understand, and like this is modern civilization. How modern civilization came to be was literally they took one group of people and said, you're going to be the ones that go up and your whole life, this is your job. They literally divided the labor up, right? And like you're going to be the ones that go up here. It took 30 generations of people single-mindedly devoted to observing and recording the motions of the planets before we understood them enough to have the ephemerides. And I'm old enough to know what the heck an ephemeris is. For those
Yeah,
of you that don't,
part of that, right?
ephemeris is just a table of planetary positions, right? It's coded into your computer program that you use to generate your charts and stuff. Wonderful, yeah.
American ephemeris for the
Well,
21st century,
was
2000.
talking earlier, like I became an astrologer through finding a Rosicrucian of one of those old blue. Remember those really thick, 100-year the old blue Rosicrucian ephemeris. Um, so the ephemeris only became possible after 30 generations of humans dedicating themselves their whole lives to observing and interacting. And so there's that. And then there's what we're talking about here, which is this Neolithic awareness of observing the lunar standstills over an 18-year period. These people didn't live to be 80 years old, by the way. You know, they had a harder life. So an
Yeah.
18-year period was you maybe saw three of those if you were lucky, you know. And so when you say it's hardwired into our DNA, yeah, like that's who we are. That's where we come from. And that's literally how the reality that we live in was created is through these activities. And so I think it's really, really important to understand what Caylin's saying is absolutely literally true. It is in your DNA. The people who you descended from did these things and they created the world that we live in now from these activities.
I
Yeah,
love that so much. Oh my gosh.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
who we are. That
Yeah.
this is who we are. We are, and so we are reawakening to who we really are, essentially, through.
Yeah. And if we also think about how everything's connected to everything else, like, it's like we may have experience of us being separate from, but we actually are all interconnected. So the
Yeah.
planetary energies and how they're moving and interacting with each other, and how that affects the earth. And then we're on the earth, so that affects us. And then we can also, one of my favorite sayings is, we inform the mysteries as much as they inform us,
Mm,
because we are the mysteries. So if we are awake and aware, we see planetary things happening, we can help inform what we want those things to be. We do as you said in our last video, ceremonial magic with our
yes.
intention
Yes.
to help enliven the intent that we want to see that's possible. And ideally deal with any of the shadow pieces or things that we don't want to happen that people might be predicting, or the bad things that could happen, because anything's possible, but it's how
Yeah.
we're focusing our awareness and interacting with these mysteries
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
creates our power.
that's an interesting little side piece. I don't know if we really need to get into it, but with respect to prediction, I mean, I was aware. One of the first astrology articles, not first, but um, in my early career of publishing articles in astrology journals, it was back in the early 2000s, and like the new on the news was like, oh, there might be an avian flu pandemic. Like they were literally, it was like, pandemic uh, point zero two or whatever, like there, and so I wrote an article like, what does the astrology say? Could there be a pandemic? And I literally mentioned, by the way, the sort of gold standard for this in the astrology literature is the way they understood that the Black Death was basically blamed on this triple alignment of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn all happening near the Aries equinox, which happened again in 2020. And I literally mentioned, and so I was aware that like if so basically what I was saying in the article was if there is a pandemic signature, it's not until 2020. Like first of all.
Right.
And the second thing is I didn't actually go there and say, "Oh my God, there's going to be a pandemic in 2020." Even though I was aware that I could have, and I probably would have been famous if I had. But I was also aware at the time, like, I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be this doom and gloom, and the same thing goes for like, the people, and I don't even know if this is considered rude, but people are called preppers or whatever. I don't know if preppers identify as preppers or not, I guess is what I'm saying. If they identify with that term, if it's cool or not, but I remember that kind of feeling like, whoa, like I remember like in 2003, I had the summer off. I was teaching high school English and I got paid and I took the option to like get paid throughout the summer, even when I wasn't working. So I had 3 months to, and I just, wow, I can geek out on astrology. And I geeked out a little too hard. I scared myself because I looked at what was coming down the pike and I was like, oh my God, like, and I literally had this moment where it's like, okay, you're looking at like you're either gonna, if you go any further with this, you're gonna become a prepper, dude. And I was like, yeah, I don't think I want to be that guy either, you know?
Well,
Um,
and the thing is
Not that
that
there's anything wrong with that, just
right
not, I don't want to live with like this,
here.
you know, being my entire reality, man.
So do you remember, I think it was in 2003, maybe it was 2003, Mars was brightest, closest to the Earth, bigger than the moon, what some people were
Oh
saying,
my
like,
God, dude. I got
like
so tired of seeing that. Like,
and that there was this planet X that was coming by Earth and it was going to destroy the planet. And I mean, there have been these predictions that have been out there, and people flip out and they freak out and they get scared. And it's like, okay, so first of all, if that's going to happen, there's nothing we can do to stop it. And second of all, I am not going to live my life in fear. I'm just not.
no,
And
thank
it's like,
God.
and so why would we
I think
want
it
to?
must be our fire signs that make us like not wanting to do that. I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Anyway.
a Pisces sun, but my Venus is in Aries, so it's just like
Yeah. Don't you have a
whatever.
Sag moon too?
Sag moon,
Yeah.
and Jupiter and Leo.
Yeah. Like, I'm sorry. I'm not doing that. I'm not gonna live like that, man.
I'm not, no, not living that way. No, because
No.
it could happen in the blink of an eye. It could happen anytime. It doesn't have to be some asteroid or some other thing that might be headed this way.
Yeah.
It's like it could be any time that it could happen. So our opportunity is to live the best life we know how in the moment and to continue to create the intentions that we have for not only ourselves but for the entire planet,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
we get to live in a world of peace and plenty and beauty and
Yeah.
pleasure, abundance, and
That's a magical act too.
yes.
That's a magical act too. I remember reading somewhere one time that, Einstein died with unsolved equations on his blackboard, and I thought, and the point of saying that is like Einstein was Einstein until the day he died. He didn't stop being Einstein because he knew he was going to die one day, but he was going to be Einstein until that day. You know what I'm saying? And
Love
like,
that. Yeah.
that's kind of the way I feel about it. Like I'm just gonna do me the best I can and I'm a Christian, so forgive me but until God calls me home, like, and I'm not pushing that reality on anybody else, but that's just my upbringing.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, like, we don't necessarily like, and we can get, and on the flip side, I've said to people like, hey, Jupiter's doing something with your career house. This might be a really good year for you, or you might end up getting a promotion. And, and I, and it comes true. And people say, well, how the heck did you know that, Gary? And it's like, well, I've been doing this a little while. I've seen these things.
But the thing to remember is those are possibilities we
Yeah.
need done. Because
Yeah,
if we don't, they won't come true.
yeah,
So
exactly.
we are engaged in this co-creative process. There are possibilities that happen for us. There can be some challenging times or some really
Yeah,
great times. The thing I like, even say, for example, Pluto, who just went from Capricorn into Aquarius, uh, but having been in some Pluto cycles that were really hard, but they were always happening to make my life better because I had to let go of something that wasn't working.
yeah.
So that is
And that's
the,
alchemy, like that's pure alchemy. Like the first thing that happens when something gets transformed is it turns to shit. Literally. It turns,
well,
the first stage in
that's
alchemy
important,
is called nigredo, blackening,
yeah.
because why else would we change? If things are going great, we're not going, things are great. We're just going to keep going. The only thing that's going to make you change is things turn into shit.
Right.
So it's an invitation, but yeah, so we can definitely like, I'm not saying absolutely like, oh, I'm not going to be predictive. I think of it more as like forecasting. Like Cayelin said, there's possibilities, and here's like sort of the weather forecast. So there's like, like hardcore predictions are actually really hard to do. Uh,
Yeah.
and so mostly when I talk about forecasting, but I'm also like not, yeah, I'm definitely gonna hold space for and not necessarily in a like spiritual bypassing way, but for the best and highest possibilities,
Absolutely.
you
We
know.
can always hold that intention, even
Yeah.
when we're feeling miserable.
And be careful about, it's really, I think it's easier, I think it's harder to do that. Like doom and gloom is easy. Like it's not hard to find the doom and gloom. All you got to do is turn on the news. It
Right.
actually takes a lot more effort to hold space for somebody's, and especially somebody that maybe is challenging or difficult to deal with. Like holding space for their highest, that's
Yeah,
like the really hard work,
that
in
is
my
hard.
experience. Anyway.
Yep, truly. So
Um,
here we are now to look at 2025. What's
yeah.
happening with solstice and going on beyond? We've already talked about the North Node coming to the zero Aries point and how that's aligned with the lunar standstill.
Yep.
And then it's going to move because the nodes move backwards, so it's going to move back into Pisces.
Right.
And so much going on with Pisces this year.
Wow.
And in fact, I'm part of a summit that's going, and actually, so are you, Gary.
Yeah.
You're going to
Yeah. We're going to talk about this more. So, like we said earlier, this is the first of many conversations that we're going to be
conversation,
having with different points of emphasis or whatever. But
right?
yeah, there's this huge shift of, and it's interesting because there's a couple things going from Aries to Pisces, and there's a couple things going from Pisces to Aries.
Yeah.
And so there's this there, and so the
Pisces to
no,
Aries and back to Pisces
yeah, yeah,
because they're going to retrograde back
yeah,
into
that's
Pisces. So
true.
they're doing the Pisces Aries Pisces dance.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of juju around the spring equinox point, which is, the beginning of the astrological year in terms of like, where the signs start. And it's kind of like that. We talked earlier about, well, this winter solstice as a kind of beginning because it's sort of like, from there the sun moves towards the
They get
rising, like
longer,
the
or
darkest part of the day or the
at
darkest
least in the
part of the
northern
year.
hemisphere. Yeah.
But in classical astrology, the day begins at dawn, right? And so the year begins when at the equinox, because that's the natural correlate of dawn is when the sun crosses the equator going north. So there's like a different kind of beginning, I guess. It's like it's more like, yeah, oh, it's like you don't actually unless you stay up all night for, partying or whatever, you don't actually know that the day's beginning at midnight. Most of the time you're asleep, unless you
Right.
work a graveyard shift or something. So
Yeah.
this beginning at the Aries point is like more of a conscious beginning, if you will, I guess. It's more of an intentional beginning. Um, and there's a lot going on there. In particular, not only is Neptune approaching that point now, and so Neptune's going to be going from Pisces into Aries. And then, as Cayelin said, it's not going to just go from Pisces to Aries because the outer planets don't do that. They always go back and forth before, right? So it's going to go, you know, um, but then Saturn's going to go across the same point. Um, and in the meantime, the Venus cycle, the Venus star point is what Ariel Gutman calls it, which is where the conjunctions of the Sun and Venus, the cazemis happen, are moving from Aries to Pisces, and the North Node is moving from Aries. And now that, unless you're using which is it, the mean node that actually oscillates. I haven't looked. Does the mean node actually go back and forth across the Aries point?
I
It
don't
probably
know that
does.
I completely understand how they
It has
determine.
to do with a wobble and stuff. I can't say that I'm going to get it exactly right, astronomically speaking, but the true node is going to be basically just move across there.
And just
Um,
something for people to know if they don't know is that the nodes are what also determine the eclipses. So they're
yeah.
important because when the sun and the moon align, and the earth all align along the nodal band, I guess, or you
Yes.
know,
Yeah.
we'll have either a lunar or solar eclipse based on
Yeah.
what phase.
And that's because what the node is it's literally the location where the moon crosses the ecliptic. Right?
Mhm.
So it's literally the location where the moon, and so that location changes over an 18-year cycle.
Yeah,
And so because it's the place where the moon crosses the ecliptic, and the ecliptic is the path of the sun, it's the apparent motion of the sun. Of course, we know as modern people, as we talked about last time, levels of abstraction. It's really the Earth moving around the sun, but we see the sun moving. That's the ecliptic, the sun's path, and then the moon's path is inclined 5 degrees to that. So it crosses. And the place where it crosses, that's the other reason why it's called the north node or ascending node, is it crosses in an upward fashion, right? So and when it does that, and the sun's there and the moon's there together, then we have an eclipse. And that's why it's called the ecliptic, actually, because there you
right.
go. So,
One of the
um,
things I heard from somebody many years ago that I thought was a great description of eclipses. It's like when you take the tumblers in a combination lock and line them all up, then the lock opens. So it's kind of like opening the lock because the sun, the moon, and the earth are in a alignment that
yes.
creates that eclipse. And I think of eclipses as activating portals of awareness or
Oh,
whatever.
yeah. Oh, yeah. And
Yeah,
then you
so
get different, I mean,
interesting.
we do a whole nother thing on because there's different kinds of eclipses depending on the part of the lunar orbit they're activating, like an annular eclipse. The reason why it's annular, it doesn't cover the full sun, is because the moon is further away from Earth, what we call apogee, right? And so because she's further away, she's smaller, and you get this ring of fire around the sun.
I love the Ring of Fire, but I also love the total solar eclipses when
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
big and covers up the whole.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then there's the fact that they occur in like families of Saros series and all that. So maybe
yeah,
we'll
that's
come back.
definitely a conversation for another time.
Yeah,
But
that's
just to say
definitely
that
a
this March, the equinox is surrounded by eclipses, a lunar and solar eclipse. So just that could also be another conversation because
yes.
so much is happening around this in March
So,
as
so
the
that a
cycle
lot of
starts.
modern astrologers now are calling that the dragon hole, that time between the two eclipses, because people are starting to understand things get a little bit weird during that time. And then
Yeah,
you may not want to like expect reality to be normal
yeah.
during that time, right? So I'm actually traveling around that time, and I'm literally going to make sure I fly before the first eclipse, and then I'm going to be where I'm going to be, and I'm flying back after the second eclipse because I ain't trying to be in an airport when things get weird. You know what I'm saying? It's not my favorite place to be. I don't mind weird, but I don't want to be in an airport being weird. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
It's good to be aware of these things. And also, what I feel like what happens between eclipses is it's like a between alchemy place. It's like not ordinary reality. We're in a between place because,
Yeah.
you know, a window of time that's, from the first eclipse to the last eclipse. And sometimes there's like three
It can be
eclipses.
three, actually. Yeah.
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 So it can be 4 weeks instead of 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's a lot of weird.
That's a lot weird.
Mucho weirdo.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
let's talk a little bit about Venus because this is something definitely going into deeper dive, but I just loved
yeah.
some of the things you were saying about your perspective of what you're seeing with this.
Yeah, I mean, one thing about the transition from Pisces to Aries that's so dramatic is for me, I think about the first four signs of the zodiac being very personal, like Aries is just I am, and Taurus is I have, I relate to sensation, and objects, and Gemini is I think, I have these crazy ideas and I want to talk about them, and Cancer is about their feelings, very personal reactions to the world. And then in the next four signs, there's like this interpersonal dynamic where Leo likes to be on the stage, but they really need an audience to fully enjoy that, right? And then Virgo needs someone to serve, and Libra needs someone to be in relationship, and Scorpio likes to enjoy power dynamics, So there's this other that comes along, and then in the last four signs, the other becomes transpersonal, so that in Sagittarius it becomes like our relationship with a higher power, God, if you will. And in Capricorn, it's with like the state, or if you will. Aquarius, the other becomes humanity, and in Pisces, the other literally becomes the world or the cosmos or the universe. Um, so the last four signs have this really broad, and they're ruled by, of course, the gas giants. And even in traditional astrology, we have, Jupiter and Saturn. So you see this like broad nature of these last four signs. So the first four signs are really personal reactions to the world. Like I am, I exist. Like there's a really big difference between I exist and like the universe, there's a huge um sort of qualitative difference there.
Yeah.
And one of the really interesting things about that is since the 90s, the majority of the outer planets have been in these last four signs, since Pluto went into Sagittarius. And what, like that was like I remember it as when Jerry
95
Garcia
was
died. Yeah. Like
95.
when
Yeah.
we lost Jerry, that was like that's my it's like sort of my marker for that. Um but since then the all of the outer planets, or most of the outer planets, have been in those last four signs. And then eventually Uranus went into Aries, and now Taurus, but you still had two out of the three in the those last four signs. But when Neptune comes across and goes into Aries, now we're going to have the majority over here in these personal signs. So that's going to be like a really big shift. But you actually asked me to talk about Venus, so I so I need, so
But
I
no,
need to
I
get
think
back on track.
this is important
Yeah.
because it'll help people to understand why this is significant about what's happening with Venus.
Yeah. So there's this really big difference between just I am, like I have a right to exist, like I have, and really, in the Western democracies, we think of people having basic rights as beings, like as individuals. And thank God, and in the USA, I have a right to free speech, for instance. I have various rights, and you can talk about. I think it's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, if you want to use that framework or whatever. People think of individuals as having certain God-given rights, right? That's Aries. That's what we're talking about. Like as a sovereign individual, I exist and I have certain rights because I exist, you know? That's like really Aries. And then Pisces is more about like the collective, like no person is an island though. And so my right to free speech is not absolute. I can't yell fire in a crowded theater because I think it's funny. I don't actually, by the way, just so we're clear. I
Some
don't.
people do think it's funny.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but you can't do that because people might stampede and people could get killed.
Yeah.
So there's the Pisces thing is more of like understanding, like, hey, if you're in a crowd of people, you have to behave as an individual within a crowd of people. Like you have to be aware of your surroundings and that you're a member of a community, you know? Um, and so there's a very different, and then we get into the struggle of like, well, which one's more important? You know, is my status as a member of a community, should I be constantly like putting that first and putting my own individual needs, for instance, as a head of a household, for instance, it's common for people to think that as the head of a household, you put the needs of your family before your own, right? And we can talk about, and then in the last 10 years or so there's been a huge, I'm going to say, conversation in air quotes, because I think it's really more people talking at each other than with each other, actually, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
there's been a lot of talk, let's just say, about that idea of like the collective taking precedence over the individual in some instances, and if so, when and how much, right? And so that idea of like individual rights versus collective responsibilities, I think we're at a crossroads right now where that is really like front and center, exactly where a lot of planetary activity is going on. And so it's really fascinating to me, um, especially with the Venus cycle, because the Venus cycle is actually going in the reverse direction from where the outer planets are going. She's going from the personal sign of Aries to the collective sign of Pisces. And it'll
So what,
be,
just let me just say really quickly what Gary means by that
yeah,
is that and this all depends. There's many different ways of tracking the Venus cycle. And I'll just say the thing I always say is whatever you put your attention on is going to be what works for you.
yeah,
So there's no right or wrong, better or worse, or good or bad. It's just what you put your attention on. I personally love to track the Venus cycle when she rises as morning star in the sky because you can see her. When she's with the sun, you cannot see her. So you can
right.
have a more direct experience of her, but she's going retrograde in Aries in the evening sky. She's going to conjunct the sun in Aries, and then she's going to rise up into the morning sky in Pisces. So that's what we're referring to, going from that Aries piece to the Pisces piece.
Yeah,
And this is the first time Venus has risen in Pisces in 155 years,
a long time.
a long time.
Yeah.
So and actually in the cycle that she completed 155 years ago, started 251 years
Yeah, so it's
ago,
about 251 years.
from what a start to a start.
Yeah, between Sun Venus alignments on a particular degree. So if we just take the zero Aries point, for instance, it's been about 250 years. Now, this is very interesting, Cayelin, because a lot of people are talking about the USA Pluto return, which, by the way, is what, about 248 years, right? But nobody's talking about the USA Venus star point return because it's pretty much the same. It's only a few years difference.
Yeah.
And this to me is like, I don't know, like Venus always, and I'm a little bit biased to this day about this, but to me, Venus is way more immediate. Like not only can I see her, but it's like it's my values. It's like what I find beautiful. And yes, that's in the eye of the beholder, but it's a very personal, subjective experience. Beauty
And we can see Venus, she's the brightest thing in the sky. Pluto, you cannot
you
see
can't
without
see.
a telescope. And even with the telescope, Pluto can be tricky to see.
So I find it really crazy, a little bit crazy making for me personally, anyways, that there's a lot like, and you can literally like I saw the Pluto return, USA Pluto return was a t-shirt on Amazon. Like it's literally being somewhat grokked, actually.
I want to do the Venus return thing.
The Venus return, it's
Yeah,
like,
let's start.
and so and it's interesting because when you start to think about the values that were, if Venus is about our values and what we value, um, and if you really start to look at the values that people were gathering together, right? There was this collective, and there was literally like right or wrong, and you can tear down their statues if you want or whatever, right? That's like you have a right, actually, I think, um, to do, to protest and whatever. But uh,
Long as you do no harm.
well, to me, like I'm a nonviolent person, so for me, like do no harm. Um, but
Well,
yeah,
I mean,
like,
you're infringing on someone else's rights if you're harming them.
yeah, yeah, that's
So
right, that's right. Um, but yeah, so there's this idea that this group of people got together and they pledged their lives to one another to form a nation.
yeah,
And that's a pretty strong statement of shared value. You know what I'm saying? Like now, I don't know if that's even possible right now. Like, could we actually get together and pledge our sacred honor and our earthly lives to one another in order to start something? I
good
don't know.
question.
I
That's a
mean, but that's what was going on 251 years ago, is that's what was going on. And so this idea of this collision between the Venus in Pisces and the Venus in Aries point, like that's a really good, you know,
well, then for the US, it was Scorpio Libra. So it's actually the next cycle, 2026. Um, and it happened in 2018 where it went from Scorpio to Libra. It started rising in Libra. And then the next time will be in 2026 when
wouldn't
it,
it have been all of the star points though? Wouldn't this one have also been in transition?
probably,
Yeah,
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
would, yeah, this one would have been in play too. Yeah, because by the way, the other, the other, one, the Scorpio Libra one is one that's also in transition. So literally, the two signs, the two sets of signs that are ruled by Venus and Mars, the Venus cycle is shifting from the Mars ruled signs to the Libra ruled sign, to the Venus ruled sign. Sorry. Um, yeah. So. But yeah, this idea of the Venus cycle moving from Aries to Pisces is really interesting to me. And there's in particular there's this, if we go back to this idea of the nodes crossing the Aries point, and we're going to bring it all back together. So we have the Venus cycle, we have the nodes crossing, and we have the planet Neptune is about to cross the Aries point, and they're all going to kind of come together around February 1st. There's going to be this meeting of Venus and the Moon, and it's going to be the seventh of seven conjunctions between Venus and the Moon. As Venus enters the evening sky, there's seven conjunctions progressively higher in the sky, where they get higher and brighter. And so this is going to be the final one right before she goes retrograde and disappears, right? So there's this culmination of this visual cycle of Venus. So there's going to be Venus and the Moon with Neptune that you can see, with Neptune in the North Node, which you can't see, but are very real astrological phenomenon, as we know.
And this is rare because if you think of Neptune as a 165-year cycle, you think of the North Node as an 18 and a half year cycle. You think of Venus being in the phase that she's in, a 251-year cycle, and then the moon's monthly, but but it's also the lunar standstill moon time.
Right?
So,
So there's a lot of really big stuff going on.
kind of
And, once again, I mean, I talked about this on a recent podcast, and I talked about how, like, basically, and in fact, I think this is part of how you and I connected is like you were talking about that lunar eclipse that was conjunct Neptune. And I like, you know, Facebook quoted you, I think, or whatever you call it. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like I shared your
they
post
posted or
that reposted. Yeah.
yeah.
I did a little bit more about that, and I was literally saying to people like, this is literally the only lunar eclipse conjunct Neptune and Pisces that we will ever see in our lifetimes. It's a literally one in 165-year deal. And I remember at the time, and again, it's one of those things where, one literal interpretation of that could be like, uh-oh, like, ooh, lunar eclipse, Neptune, like, I don't know, floods or whatever. Turns out there was this, and I was part of it. I mean, I didn't get personally flooded out. The bridge, like literally 1 mile in that direction, got completely obliterated.
By the hurricanes,
Yeah,
right?
by that hurricane that came through right after that eclipse. And so there's this really big collective event that anchored. Now, it may not have been I don't know, like it it turns out it was that. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you, "Oh, watch out," because I don't know. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? But so we have a similar thing happening here, actually even bigger really, because we just had two cycles occurring there, like the eclipse cycle and the Neptune cycle. But what we're talking about here is literally like it is an eclipse cycle because you got the node, and it's a Neptune cycle, going through the zodiac, and then you also have the Venus cycle tied into that. And so it feels like there's there's like this big collective initiation is the only way I know of saying it.
This
That
is as Venus is retrieving her crown chakra,
yes,
a health, ideally a healthy relationship to her crown chakra and her reconnection to the divine. And
yes,
so what a powerful gateway this is going to be for everyone, whether they're aware of it or not. And probably anywhere where we're not aligned, we're going to get to see where that's happening. Hopefully, we've been doing our work, and then we get to have that connection to the divine in a whole new way, in a
yeah.
whole um, like I don't know. I think there's a word that I cannot think of. Like it's huge, it's humongous, it's big, it's bigger than we can imagine in terms of what's possible.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I've been realizing is like, it's my job to, and yours as we read people's charts and stuff to help people to reimagine, to sort of um redream their reality, if you will.
Yes.
And so like I'm familiar with that concept, but what I'm realizing is like this is bigger even than that. Like like this is probably like to the I remember like on the other side of like I don't predict negative stuff because A, I don't want to bring that into reality, and because B, I'm not always sure that that's actually like there's a lot of ways it could play out. On the other hand, there's been a lot of times where it was like really simple, literal things that I'm just like, nah, it couldn't be that simple, right? Yeah, it turns out it is, right? And
Yeah.
but I literally couldn't imagine that life could be that magical, like, nah, it wouldn't be that easy, right? No, it's got to be harder than that because why? Because you're addicted to it being hard? I don't know, but I get the feeling like even for someone like me or you who's used to trying to recontextualize and open up people's minds, to a more cosmic reality. Like it's even bigger than that. Like there's literally like you cannot imagine um how much bigger of a reality you're being invited into than what's
Love what you're saying. I mean, if we think
yeah.
about, because we're dreaming our reality all the time, the smaller individual reality, but we're we're part of a greater collective reality that's also being collectively dreamed by each of our individual dreams and how that all comes together. And so it's never been more important to be dreaming our reality from a place of universal compassion and love, very Pisces,
Yeah.
right? So that's what we're putting into place at these magical moments of what's happening with the Aries Pisces dance, I guess, as we could
Yeah.
say. Yeah, so the dreaming aspect, I mean, if you think about Neptune, one of the ways I like to describe it is the field of all possibilities. It's where everything exists before it comes into form.
Hmm. Yeah.
So when,
No, that's
when we
great.
have planetary alignments like this, we can tap into what is it we're bringing into form. And we want to make sure it's anchored in love
Yeah.
because uh, that's the world we want to live in. We want to live in a
Yeah.
world that is universal love, not, you know,
Yeah. And I mean, even, like if you read Eastern philosophy, like even for people who have harmed you, the best thing is love. And this is not even necessarily, again, even in Eastern philosophies, it's not necessarily, of course, Jesus, that was his main message, right?
right,
Even love your enemies. But if you think about it, like just from a really practical perspective, right? If you wish love and happiness for your enemy, if they're feeling loved and happy, they're not going to be bothering you,
exactly.
right? So it's like it's actually pretty practical.
It's pretty
It's not just
practical. Yep.
spiritual bypassing. It's like the
Right.
most practical thing is for everybody to get their needs met and be happy and loved, and they're not going to be messing with each other.
Yeah. Love changes everything. Love is the answer to everything. Love heals everything. I mean, love is it's a high vibrational energy. So if we're intending to be vibrating with that energy and there's enough of us, it'll change everything.
Yeah, and that brings up another really interesting point that kind of illustrates this difference between Aries and Pisces, where, there's a lot of people who will say, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a lot of different ways to say that. That's just one way. But they're really hardcore activists basically, and they're saying if you're not an activist, you're dragging the activists down. You're not helping, man. I mean, I get it. Like if you like I get like I totally know what it's like to be pulling really hard on a load and see somebody else not pulling. That's not fun, you know? But at the same time, I think there's another way of thinking about like what Cayelin was talking about of like being really centered in our intent, like our inner world. In other words, is it true that in a sort of materialistic sense, if there's only material reality, then if you're not doing something, if you're not being an activist, then you're not contributing to the progression or evolution or whatever you want to call it, right? But but that's basically like like a materialist, uh, um, and even like a non-spiritual perspective.
Yeah.
If spiritual reality is at least as valid as material reality, then in theory at least, um, someone should be able to affect things as much, maybe even more, because actually in most spiritual, and this includes actually Western esotericism, like, and this is in it's in the Tao too, so it doesn't necessarily have to be Western, but that material reality comes from the spiritual reality is primary. That in the Tao, what it says is that the corporeal the non-corporeal is the source of the corporeal. That's the one translation that I'm aware, that I'm most familiar with in my little pocket Tao that I used to carry around with me when I was hitchhiking. You know, um, that the spiritual reality is primary and that the material world is just the most dense manifestation of that. So,
I'm with you on that, Gary. In my transcendental meditation days, they talked about pure consciousness, and everything comes from pure consciousness. And
so,
that and that's where anything and everything exists. And then it starts to move into form based on what we're thinking and
Plato's
what
archetypes, whatever you want to call it, sorry, Plato's forms, Jung's archetypes, whatever you want to call it. Um, from that perspective, actually being an activist is kind of a dense form of like that actually, if you can vibe yourself, well
that
enough,
was how
right
I was an
enough, whatever,
activist when I was younger.
you
I
know,
was,
yeah,
yeah,
spiritual activism is a real thing, I think is what
it,
I'm trying to say,
yeah.
And so there's no reason to discount that as a legitimate way of affecting the collective,
And
of
we can do that now. We can, I mean, I'm still doing it. I did it in a
prayer.
different, but
I'll
yeah,
never forget, man, when my mother-in-law passed away, one of the things that we found, she was a really devout Christian. She was Armenian, and ancestors came to this country because they were highly persecuted for being Christians, and so they were devout. I mean, that's devout. I mean, they're literally Christian in the sense, in the early Christian sense of the word, of like you suffered for your faith. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I remember seeing her prayer book and all the people she was, it just, wow. It's like, wow, like the power of that and like the devotion of that.
Our prayers, no matter how we're praying, our prayers have an impact when they come from love, when
Yeah.
they come from a desire to create a better world, when they come from the desire for everybody to live in peace and plenty and joy and abundance and love. It's like,
Yeah.
so however we pray, that's one of the ways we can help change the world.
Absolutely. Prayer is like should never be discounted as like a way to change the world. I've really firmly believe that. And even if you're not a Christian, like if you're just praying, and it doesn't even
Pray
matter
all
if
the
you
time.
have a religious framework to pray. I
Yeah,
think you can pray just just,
right.
for love
Invoke,
and
or
peace
I
and
sometimes I call it invocation or,
yeah, whatever you want to
and
call it.
but I have certain intentions I do every day that are for me and for the world. So these are things we can do and to help create that change. And I feel like the more of us that are doing that as we go through these times of, especially, the planetary energies tapping into that pure consciousness, pure uh, before form, pure,
Yeah.
energy before we get to form,
Yeah.
and and we can tune in from there, then we're going to be able to create something that, again,
Yeah.
as
And
before we haven't
again,
imagined possibly yet.
yeah, and again, I mean, if you just think about it from like practical terms, let's say you have a problem in your life, that's like whatever you need help with, I don't know anybody that doesn't. Um, Even rich people, even the most rich. In fact, oftentimes the richness is the source of their problem. But, um, if you think you want X, Y, or Z to solve that problem, and so you pray for X, Y, or Z, but really, for all you know, X, Y, or Z is not only not gonna solve that problem, it might even make it worse, actually. If
Exactly. So
because the
this or
reason it
something better that I can't even imagine right now. This or
exact
something
yeah, yeah,
better.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that idea of like that that there's an infinity of ways to solve this problem, and I may not be in touch with but one or two or three of them.
Have a
And so
narrower
really,
perspective. Yeah.
yeah, and I may not even be in touch with the real true nature of the problem either,
Right. There you go. Yeah.
because and so that idea of like opening up to possibilities of that um that there's better ways of solving our problems than we're aware of. And
Yes.
that's really practical actually, because many times it's probably true, you know?
Wasn't it Einstein who said you can't solve the problem on the level of the problem?
Yeah, exactly. And that's also what Jung said. Jung
Yeah.
basically said we don't solve our problems, we outgrow them.
Right.
We just grow, and then it's not a problem anymore because we're past it.
Right.
It's in,
Yeah.
and so yeah, there's that level of like openness to, and it's kind of humbling, there's a humbleness I think that comes with the Piscean and Neptunian energy of like I'm just a little drop in an ocean, I'm just like, and I'm just like one of, or a book, one book on a shelf, or whatever, however you want to imagine it. There's an aspect of humility, of understanding, like, but through that humility, by we gain this immenseness of possibilities that we wouldn't have had without that humility. And so yeah, it's interesting to think about like that even in our suffering, humility can serve a purpose, because it's only through humility that we can open up to other sources of relief from our suffering, by understanding that there's ways to do this that we don't know, we're not aware of, and we need to be open to new things in order to allow those things into our lives.
I'm loving this. So I feel like this is a great way to wrap this up is just, we have so many possibilities in front of us right now as we approach the solstice, as we get past the solstice, as we approach these events that we've been talking about that are happening. And so we can ideally, this would be an Aries kind of thing, commit
Ah, yeah.
taking action by praying, by invoking, by intending, by
Showing up for the
meditating,
solstice.
whatever it is that we're doing to help create a different vibration in the world that is loving and kind and caring.
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah,
so that's what it feels like, is in essence what we're talking about here
yeah.
with these amazing opportunities that are coming our way, astrologically speaking, cosmically speaking. So. Any final thing you want to say before we wrap this up?
Ah, yeah, no, I'm really excited actually. Like I feel there's so much more. Like please stay tuned, first of all. Like I know Cayelin has a lot to offer, and I know
Gary.
I'm aware that I've just begun to understand this myself. Like I'm just being like that thing where I said like open your mind to more possibilities. Like that's actually what I do every day is try to help people do that. But I'm aware that even I'm not there yet. And
Yeah,
so I think
it's an ongoing process.
stay tuned and keep there's a lot more here. We're going to be talking about this individually and together we're going to be part of another event. And so I would just say stay tuned and like it's okay if you don't get it yet or if you aren't feeling it yet or like one thing I was saying on my Instagram the other day is like there's a lot like it's interesting because I feel very differently now, but at that point in time, I was like, I know there's big stuff coming and I want to tell you all about it, but I don't feel like it's time to speak it yet. Today, I feel comfortable speaking it, but so if you're in a quiet place with it, it's okay to be there too. Um, but be open to the words coming and the call to action. There may be some real serious action that you need to take as
Yeah.
well and being open to that. But basically, just stay tuned. Tune in. Don't need
Yes.
to drop out. You don't need to turn on or drop out necessarily, but just stay tuned in. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and together we'll change the world. We'll make it a fun, more loving, kind, caring place to be.
Yay. Woohoo.
And it doesn't take that many of us for that to happen. It doesn't even take 1%, according to the whole superconductive physical,
Right.
physics conductive field.
Right.
So, and love is a superconductive field as far as I'm concerned. So I feel
Yeah.
like,
And that's what's really exciting is like to see how many people are really becoming more aware of, um, not just astrology, but astrology. I mean, Caitlin, man.
hey,
Astrology has grown by the aware amount of people that are aware of astrology, even just in the last 10 years. It's incredible. So just think about that. Like just that, like just the fact that that many more people are aware of and tuning into astrology, that's super hopeful.
when I first started doing this back in the 90s, I didn't even want to tell people I was an astrologer because like what?
Right?
Hey,
Right?
what?
No, you were literally like, yeah, being in the closet or at least being anonymous about it was not a bad idea.
Not a bad idea at all.
At all, and nowadays it's way different. Like I really think we are living through a renaissance in
Yeah,
astrology.
yeah,
And it's not just astrology. It's like there's a lot more people open to these kind of things right now. And so yeah, I think it's
yeah.
super hopeful.
It's
Yeah.
beautiful. Well, it's so great to do this with you,
Thank
Gary.
you. So
And
happy to be
I'm
here.
looking forward to whatever we do in the future next.
Yes.
And so stay tuned and definitely check
Stay
out the show
tuned.
notes for link to Gary's website, to some of the things we talked about, also to our summit. I'll see if I can get the link to the summit if people want
Awesome.
the whole Aries Pisces thing that's being superconductors of love that we're doing in March.
Mm.
And and anything else that I think of that I have not thinking about in the moment.
Stick
Or
links
that
in
you
there.
think of, Gary, and you can send me.
Yeah,
That would be
sounds
great to
good.
go for. So, all
Yeah.
right. So
Stay
thank you.
tuned. Happy New Year.
Much love to everybody.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.